From Fox 13, this is Good Day Tampa Bay.
Back in custody, but his attorney didn't really focus on that.
They took a much different track yesterday, focusing more on the evidence in the case and starting to poke holes in the state's theory of their murder charges. And a lot of things they did, they introduced 911 tapes, they called George Zimmerman's father to the stand, they introduced the medical examiner's report, and a lot of different things that we've seen released in the media already. The interesting thing about having his father testify is that the FBI has already analyzed those voice samples and determined that they can't determine if it's Trayvon Martin versus George Zimmerman. Some of the other things that were interesting is that George Zimmerman actually wanted to testify, but with the condition that he not be cross-examined. As we all know, that's not how it works in the court, and Judge Lester pointed that out to him. And one of the other things that was important to note is that he didn't want to be treated any differently than anyone else, and also that he wanted to explain himself, and also that he told the judge that he can be trusted most of the time, and that's why he should be given the same bond again. So a lot of very unusual tactics that they employed trying to get the same bond as they did the last time.
He can be trusted most of the time?
Most of the time. That's a direct quote from the hearing.
Interesting. And it sounds more like the hearing already started than just, the trial started than just this bond hearing. It was just the tactics, like you said, were definitely...
It was really a lot more, and he wanted to start poking holes in the state's case to show that, he can be released on a lower bond as opposed to a high bond, given what he perceives are the flaws in the state's case.
So Zimmerman was in street clothes the night of the Trayvon Martin shooting.
Well, actually, he was in street clothes in court. That was the other controversial thing. He actually filed a motion on Thursday afternoon before the hearing to allow his client, Mr. Zimmerman, to appear in court in a suit and tie as you see him there. The odd thing is that usually they come in their jail uniforms, and Marco Mera has been made a lot of waves about not trying this case in the court of public opinion and that he not be treated differently than anyone else. But then when he files a motion to have him appear in street clothes, without shackles, without chains, which is also a security risk, the judge has to weigh that, and now he's actually treating him differently, which is what Marco Mera is trying not to have done in the case.
How did Zimmerman's jail calls between him and his wife factor into the judge's decision?
They're going to factor in because he's going to go back and look at those because they were introduced by the state in that in-between hearing when they revoked his bond initially. So the judge has to weigh not only the money trail in the case, but also the subterfuge that him and his wife were using in order to move the money around and hide it. It all goes to his credibility and also her credibility. We didn't see her testify yesterday, so he's going to take all that into account in the end.
And you also went back and watched the video reenactments.
Yes, very interesting.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
There was a lot of things that when George Zimmerman met with investigators and went out to the scene and started to reenact the incident, as you see there, you can see the investigators really honed in on the bandages on the back of his head. You see those two butterfly Band-Aids. Yeah. And then also interesting, the way that he reenacted the scene and things he said in terms of he was on the ground, he was smashing his head in, and then Trayvon Martin reached for his gun and I just shot him. Was kind of a very casual way in which he described it. As you can see him there, describing how he was being held down, and also the fact that he actually said some words that allegedly Trayvon Martin said to him, "You got me," right before he fell off of him and later died. So interesting to see how he puts together his reenactment and his version of the events. As we talked about with Kristen in the past few weeks, does it match up with the forensic evidence, and does it match up with his previous statements? And that's what prosecutors are really hanging their hat on in their case in chief.
Where do you see this bond hearing going as far as the results, or when do you think the judge will make a decision?
I think the judge will probably make a decision early next week. I would expect him to increase the bond significantly and make him post a higher amount of bond. If you post $150,000 or your bond's $150,000, you only have to post 15% of that along with some collateral, like for example your house, a car, other property that you own. I would expect the judge to probably increase it based on all of George Zimmerman's activities in the meantime, and the fact that he really gave him one chance to get this right the first time, and he kind of blew it. So lots more to come.
A lot more to come, and I'm sure we'll all be watching closely. Thank you so much, Felix.
You bet, Jen.
All right, Lindsay, how's the forecast looking? Nice and warm this weekend?
Yeah, we have
And now, Fox 13 meteorologist Lindsay Milbourne with your Sky Tower Omni forecast.
plenty of heat around this afternoon, Jen. In fact, the sun is shining right now.
Rulings in politically charged cases, including the long-awaited ruling on the president's controversial health care law. And back with us this hour is attorney Felix Vega. Hey, good morning.
Good morning again, Jen.
Thanks for being here. So there was a lot of confusion when the decision finally came down. I mean, I was here in the newsroom. People here were confused. Several news agencies were getting it wrong. Can you break it down for us as simply as possible, please?
There was a lot, because you look at this, it's 193 pages of opinion that the court wrote. Broke down about 60 for the majority, 130 from the dissent itself. And so there was really 5 key things that came out of this, and the big argument was over whether it's violated the Commerce Clause or whether it could be considered a tax.
Okay.
You take a look at this, we can break it down for you a lot simpler. Then that was the really key thing, was the Commerce Clause versus the tax was the first thing. And also the Obama team really argued that it was going to be both in their initial argument in their briefs to the court, which a lot of people really glazed over.
Sure.
In the run-up to the lawsuit and the oral arguments. The penalty versus the tax, that's the other big thing that people were confused about, because the Obama team was saying that it wasn't a tax, it was a penalty. The Supreme Court said no matter which way you slice it, it's still a tax. And it was one key vote by Chief Justice Roberts that was the deciding vote between the two groups. They were split 4-4. So without him agreeing one side or the other, that's where it really came down to the dividing line. And what it means in the end, 33 million more people are going to be covered for the time being. And that's the important thing that people also need to remember, is this is not the end of this whole debate.
And Roberts being a conservative, I know a more conservative judge, that was a big surprise for people too.
It was a huge surprise, and he caught a lot of fallout from that. And when he was being confirmed, actually, the Democrats actually seized on the fact that he was more of a referee, more of a moderate in terms of his decision making. He wanted to be straight down the line when it came to legal decisions and not politicize the court. It's a lot of times why you see Supreme Court members not going to the State of the Union address, for example. But take a look at what John Roberts actually had to say. He wanted to put this in the opinion itself. It says, "We do not consider whether the act embodies sound policies. That judgment is entrusted to the nation's elected leaders. We ask only whether Congress has the power under the Constitution to enact the challenge provisions." What does that mean going forward? You're going to see the law get implemented in stages, but the Democrats actually built into the law that it wouldn't go into effect in full until 2014. So you're going to see parts of it rolled out in phases, but instead of just rolling it out all in one bunch, the gamble with that for them, if the Republicans retake control of the Senate and they retake control of the White House, Mitt Romney and the Republicans have vowed to repeal this law. So it's no guarantee really how far it's going to get implemented before the 2012 election. Now, Mitt Romney is going to take heat on his side because he enacted a very similar plan, some say identical, in Massachusetts. It was called the Massachusetts Connector Plan. And when you go online and look at the actual plan, I pulled some of the facts and figures from it last night, 98.1% of Massachusetts residents are fully insured. They have the largest insured rate in the entire country. Mitt Romney's argument is that it worked well in his state. This was not a model for the entire country to follow. However, we know that that was the blueprint for Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act is actually known by law. So both sides are going to be jockeying over this until November.
Oh, and they have already started.
Exactly.
Okay, so is there really a winner on either side of this issue in the long run, or is it kind of hard to tell now, like you said, because of the implementation
It's hard
process?
to tell right now because it's so politicized, and going forward to the election cycle, you're going to see both Obama and Romney and the Republicans and the Democrats go back and forth and blame each other about the law and also how it should be implemented in the end.
And we only have another minute or so, but there was another important decision handed down.
Yes, very important one.
And that was that it made it unconstitutional for a juvenile to be sentenced in life in prison for murder.
Yes, and this was a rollback of some other cases that came out of Florida. They actually made it unconstitutional for juveniles to be sentenced to life in prison for crimes like robbery and sexual battery. Now the Supreme Court has said in mandatory life sentences for murder, they're going to roll that back, and they can no longer be sentenced to mandatory life. There's going to be some discretion for the courts, but they cited varying things, mostly because it comes down to a nature versus nurture argument. The environment that these kids come from, should they be given a second chance based on the crime that they committed? And there was a lot of factors. You saw Nicholas Lindsay, who was just tried in the shooting death of Officer Crawford in St. Pete a couple of months ago. His sentence may be looked at and may possibly be overturned because he was one of the children or juveniles that was sentenced to a mandatory life sentence. So now the courts are going to look at that and say, well, do we need to undo his sentence and roll it back? So that's and you saw how emotional that trial was as well. So in a lot of these cases where people have lost loved ones, and now they're going to have to go back and relive a lot of this through sentencing phase. So a lot of implications in that case, and a very strong decision by the Supreme Court to make that decision in the end.
Both topics very Controversial.
Yes, very political, but you got to remember, we in the media, we have to report what the law is and stay with that, as opposed to getting involved in all the politics of it.
And you do a great job doing that.
Thank you, Jen.
So much,
Appreciate
Felix. All right, let's head over to Lindsay. Hotter, warmer, stickier forecast ahead for us?
That's right, feeling more like Florida. In fact, as we look outside over Lakeland, 72 degrees.